We made it! The final shape has finally been released. I've been taking the past 2 days to really absorb everything I can about the expansion. I finished the Legend campaign, unlocked all the Prismatic Fragments, played a bunch of the post-campaign activities, and of course did some Prismatic build testing. This video is going to be my impressions of all the gameplay related content we got in the Pale Heart. I'll have more videos in the future about the raid, the builds I find to be really fun and or good, and pretty much anything else. So strap in, it's time to answer whether or not the final shape is a worthy expansion for the climax of the story of Destiny. Hey everyone, I'm Rizeki and welcome to my design analysis of the final shape expansion. As always, thanks for taking the time to check out the video. You guys have been killing it with the support lately and I really appreciate it. If you've been liking the content, don't forget to leave a like on this video, and of course subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We have a bunch of content planned now that the final shape is out, and you won't want to miss any of it. But with all that said, it's time to talk about everything we got in the final shape. First and foremost, I'm going to try and keep this video fairly spoiler free. I'll be focusing on the gameplay of the expansion, not the story, and I will say when I'm about to talk about specific activities if you would like to play them before you hear what I have to say. Anyway, with the spoiler warning out of the way, here's all my thoughts on the expansion after 2 days of playing it. We have to start, of course, with the campaign. It's the main content you'll be playing, and if it's bad, it would really soil the rest of the expansion. My quick answer is, yes, it's pretty good. But you're here for the long answer, so let's go into the specifics. I played the campaign by myself on Legendary difficulty using Hunter. I felt as though the difficulty of the missions was appropriate. I was challenged most of the time, with a number of encounters really testing my ability to deal with multiple new enemy types, like the various Dread, as well as pre-existing enemies. The new Dread were really great additions to the game. For those unfamiliar, the Dread is the new faction that includes enemies such as Tormentors, which of course we've seen before, but also a number of new enemies such as Husks, Subjugators, and the Grim. Up until now, most enemies in Destiny were pretty cookie cutter, aka you could beat them by just shooting them until they died. And the attacks they used were mostly just basic projectiles. Every Dread has a unique method of attacking, as well as how to defeat them, so it's much different. Subjugators are similar to Tormentors, but instead of using void attacks and command grabs, they could use Stasis or Strand. Now, let me tell you, the Stasis Subjugators and Attendants are not too tough to deal with. Sure, you'll get cold, but it's easy enough to avoid their attacks. Strand Subjugators and Weavers are different. Getting hit by their attacks can suspend you for a really long time, or alternatively, you get flung across the room. It put me in quite a few bad situations, especially in the final mission of the campaign. If you know, you know. So you need to pay extra attention to the types of enemies in the encounters to be able to successfully avoid their attacks and take them out. The Husks are like a mixture of Invisible Fallen Assassins and Lucent Moths. And the best part, they usually spawn in groups. They will sneak up behind you and melee you for massive damage. These were a great addition, since it forced you to, again, pay attention to all your surroundings at once, not just the subjugator in front of you. If you ignore the Husks, you'll be in for quite a surprise. I also really liked how you could defeat the Husks in a very particular way in order to avoid the secondary spawn when they die. It rewards players for understanding how these enemies behave, while also providing you with a nasty surprise if you don't. Finally, the Grim are the first true flying enemy. Not only does this already change how we have to think about engaging them, but they have a screech that will completely turn off all of your abilities for a short period. If you don't deal with the Grims, you'll have a very tough time clearing out pretty much anything else. All of the Dread enemies make the fights in the expansion a lot more interesting than just run and gun. You need to actively pay attention to the fight, which is something that was never really a part of any previous campaign, and maybe was only something found in Grandmasters previously. But in GMs, it was mostly because of how much damage enemies could deal, not so much the mechanics. Dread make you think because of their unique mechanics, which is much more interesting and honestly more fun to deal with. One thing I really enjoyed was how each mission and the encounters within felt more similar to a mini dungeon, more so than previous campaigns. What I mean by this is that the arenas had real mechanics, not just enemies to kill. Whether that was using prismatic energy to be able to transcend to defeat specially shielded enemies, or using a relic to complete certain objectives, or some combinations of multiple mechanics, it didn't matter. The encounters felt a lot more full of life, since I had to really interact with the encounters, not just push my way through them. On Legend, the combat felt challenging, but not overly difficult, but enough that, again, I couldn't just breeze through. Especially in areas with Subjugators, Tormentors, or a combination of different Dread types, I really needed to pay attention in order to win. I was engaged the entire time, which is something I didn't really feel during Lightfall's campaign last year. Boss encounters were great, and my favorite was definitely the final boss. I won't spoil the fight, but holy moly the mechanics. I was thoroughly challenged, and it was a great combination of combat and mechanics that made it feel like a true final campaign boss. Other fights throughout the campaign were similar, with each fight having some kind of mechanic in addition to good combat. Great job with these, Bungie. My favorite change to the design of the campaign this time around has to do with Prismatic, or the lack thereof. Let me explain. Prismatic is of course given to you during the campaign, and very early in fact, but it is never forced on you. Personally, I didn't even use Prismatic for about half the campaign, mostly because I hated the starting hunter kit, I'll get to that later, and I was able to complete missions with pretty much no problems. The included transcendent wells in each mission allowed me to break shields without needing to actually use the subclass, which was awesome. No one liked being forced into stasis or strand during Beyond Light and Lightfall respectively, so not being forced into a subclass this time felt great. Also, just a general thing, but the environment design and level design was spot on. Each arena felt like an arena. I could tell by just stepping into an area that there was going to be a fight, or otherwise what kind of fight it was going to be. I couldn't say that in every location in previous expansions I felt this, so Final Shape's visual design language was a huge step up. And not only could I tell the purpose of a room, but each one just felt good to fight in. There was rarely awkward terrain, confusing rooms, etc. that could have made things difficult for no reason. Great job, level design team. And great job, art team. The Pale Heart looks absolutely spectacular. Post-campaign had a ton of content to do. I could probably make an individual video about each activity, and I probably will. But here's my thoughts so far. Also, some of these might have some minor gameplay spoilers, so be warned. Overthrow is the major activity you'll be taking part in while in the Pale Heart. It's kind of like a public event gauntlet, and defeating enough events will increase the difficulty of the area up to Tier 4. Tier 4 is a big boss fight. So far, I'm pretty happy with Overthrow. I think in terms of other destinations, this activity is really the way to go for public events. Each one is unique, is fast to complete, and are actually specialized to each region of the Pale Heart. You won't find the same 3 events in every region, and you'll find a different variety inside each individual region. And big bonus, the combat difficulty, although not legend, is still challenging enough to keep things engaging. I was never bored in the combat events, which is a really good thing, since that is, of course, what you're going to be doing most of the time. Overthrow also has really solid rewards, with the number one being the exotic sword, Ergo Sum. Completing a Tier 4 Overthrow doesn't take too long, and since the reward is pretty sweet, I'm not going to mind grinding it out for the exact role I'm looking for. Another notable activity is finding lost ghosts. Each quest will take you to something called a cyst, which is like a lost sector, but with slightly more mechanics. The cysts are probably my favorite thing to do. I will say that they probably get stale after a few runs since they are unchanging, but each one has a different boss, a different theme, and a different set of mechanics. I kind of wish Bungie made lost sectors more like these, since cysts feel almost like a watered down solo dungeon encounter instead of a lost sector. Not hard, but keeping with the theme here, it's not just a run and gun. You gotta actually think and deal with both mechanics and combat at the same time. Exotic quests are exotic quests. They're good, and the exotics they reward are pretty sweet too. My favorite so far has been the Still Hunt. I popped on my Celestial Nighthawk, and now I have 2 golden guns in my pocket at all times. You can't really get much better than that. The sword, Ergo Sum, has a ton of potential, especially with things like Wolfpack rounds, but for swords. A bunch of my friends have been trying a bunch of different roles, and they seem to really like them. Plus, it uses special ammo, which means you could run a real heavy at the same time, which is kind of awesome. Overall, all the exotics and their missions are great, and mechanically, I love the design of the weapons. I'll talk about the subclass itself in a second, but the fragment unlocking is perfect, for the most part. Best part is there is 0 time gating. I was able to unlock every prismatic fragment, and although it took all of yesterday, I did it. And it's not meaningless bounties like Stasis was, or collecting meaningless strand meditations again. And seriously, screw the strand meditations, I hate them and I still do. Prismatic fragments are actually acquired in a number of ways, by just exploring the Pale Heart. Some are given to you in the campaign, some are in secret rooms, some require you to complete quests, and some have to hunt down corrupted chests, and My personal favorite method is by completing world puzzles. The puzzles were so fun to find and figure out. Pro tip, if you see a locked prismatic chest, there's a puzzle nearby that gives you the key. Solve it, and you get a brand new fragment. Finding and solving some of these on my own with no guide was super rewarding, and I highly recommend trying it. Speaking of world secrets, there's a lot of them. Go hunt down Kvalstov, you'll know what I mean. I'm sure there's even more secrets that are yet to be discovered as well, so keep your eyes peeled. But finally, let's talk Prismatic. Like I said, I played Hunter, and I was disappointed. Sure, there were some cool builds and combinations you could do once you have access to everything, but what I was given during the campaign was bleh. Not giving us combination blow as a starting melee was definitely a mistake, since everything else given at the start pretty much directly synergizes with it. Ultimately, it felt like the kit was pretty underwhelming, and is why I stuck to Assassin's Cowl Mono Arc for half the campaign. After unlocking everything, it's clear that it is much better than it was during the campaign, but one thing I'm a little sad about is that Prismatic builds currently feel like they're just upgraded or alternate versions of already existing builds. Liar's Handshake is obviously making its rounds on the internet, but even things like Nighthawk and Tether builds are also just better on Prismatic. I haven't seen much special builds that the subclass does yet, at least on Hunter. This will probably change when we get our class items, as well as after we spend more time build crafting. For now, it feels slightly underpowered, at least on Hunter, or at the very least, not super unique. Transcendence was also disappointing. On Hunter at least, it felt like it was more of a hindrance than a help. Most Hunter builds I used revolved around Combination Blow and Gambler's Dodge, so I had infinite ability uptime anyway. The special Hailfire Grenade, in my opinion, and some of my fellow Hunter friends' opinions, is that it just doesn't do much. It's not bad, but it's also not good enough that I would want to transcend solely to use it. So with no reason to transcend for ability cooldowns, or for the special grenade, I never really wanted to do it. Also, with the number of fragments that directly impact Transcendence, it kind of feels bad if I don't want to use it, and it feels like I'm forced a little bit into building into Transcendence on each Prismatic build. Titans and Warlocks I have heard much different things about, but I have yet to try them out for myself. Apparently Titan is really good and really fun, and Warlocks are also pretty fun. Although, I heard some similar starting kit complaints about at least Warlocks. I'll be testing all the classes after the day 1 raid, and trying out some of the builds I predicted would be good in my future of Prismatic video to see how I feel about the subclass as a whole. Overall, I do like Prismatic. There's a lot of interesting combinations here, some of which we have yet to see, but it currently doesn't feel as strong as I was expecting, which is fine, but slightly disappointing. Overall, the final shape is sweet. The campaign was solid, the post-campaign was solid, the missions were solid, I love the Dread, the new Strike, the more mechanical encounters, and the Pale Heart is a wonderful destination, and I could tell a lot of care was put into its design and creation. Like I said, I can make individual videos about everything, and I probably will as the weeks go on, so stay tuned for that. I also want to play around more with Prismatic to see if it starts to bloom with a little bit more time. So, what do you think? Are you enjoying the final shape so far? Find any broken Prismatic builds? Let me know down below. If you liked the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to the channel to be notified for future uploads. I'll be live for the day 1 raid tomorrow, and I've of course got a ton of final shape content planned that you won't want to miss. But I think that's all I've got for now. As always, I've been Rizeki, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.